Well, welcome to this webinar, which is organized by Harvard University. It's a collaboration between the South Asia Institute at Harvard and Tata Trusts. We're delighted to have this opportunity to have a conversation together. This is our first webinar of a series of webinars which will be tackling questions relating to the empowerment of girls and adolescents and women in India and in South Asia more generally. So this first webinar is entitled Empowering Girls Through Educational Access and Opportunity, What Enables Deprived Girls to Succeed. And the two of us are really leading this conversation. My name is Jacqueline Bhabha, and I'm a professor of the practice of health and human rights at the Harvard School of Public Health. I'm a lawyer, human rights lawyer by training, and I have done quite a lot of work on issues related to gender and adolescence. We'll talk more about that later perhaps. And I'm very delighted and privileged to introduce our speaker today, or our presenter, who may not need much introduction to some of you familiar with this subject, Professor Shantha Sinha, who is one of India's leading child rights advocates and activists, and has a very long history of working in the field of children's rights in India. She was the founder and is now the secretary trustee of the MV Foundation, which she's going to tell us more about, which is a foundation that many people working in the field of social justice and children's rights look to as an example of really successful and creative and engaged advocacy and social service delivery on the ground. But I'll leave it to Professor Sinha to say more about that. She was also the founding chair and first chairperson of the National Commission for the Protection of Children's Rights, NCPCR, which, as some of you may know, is the leading national entity which looks after and protects and keeps an eye out on issues, a wide range of issues relating to children. By training, she's a political scientist, and she is a professor at the University of Hyderabad. And she has in the past received many honors, including the Raman Megsaya Award in 2003 and a Padma Shri in 2008. So I'm going to turn it over now to Professor Sinha, who is going to talk about a particular project related specifically to empowering girls for educational access. And then she's going to give you a little bit more general background about the work that she's done with the MD Foundation. And after that, she and I will have a dialogue, and then it'll be your turn to ask questions and make contributions. So Shanthaji, over to you.
Thank you, Jackie. I think this is a great opportunity to also share some of our concerns and views about girls' education, especially adolescent girls' education. I must thank your school for giving me this opportunity. What I thought I would do is talk about a study that we had conducted in MV Foundation. In fact, similar studies were conducted by the University of Pune and also in Rajasthan, but they were for students studying in graduate classes, but here we are talking about school students. Normal circumstances, people would like to know why children drop out of schools. But we decided to look at what makes it possible for children to go to school. And what makes it possible?
You didn't so much focus on the problems or the failure, but you looked at success. What enables girls to be successful?
Right, absolutely. Because we thought then one could learn from the positive triggers and in fact make recommendations to the government based on what worked rather than on what did not work. And we thought when we started the work, research, it would be a very easy, simple research if we asked girls what would work and what would not work. And we found over the study that it's a very, very complex issue, and that in spite of odds, girls have made it. So what I will do is I will put before you what the odds are, and then I will put before you what the positive triggers were, where the girls actually overcame, and also give what the impact of our study has been on the government. Because I think that is also important, that when there is strong evidence to show that these things work, then it is possible to influence the government and get them to accept your study and perhaps make inch by inch changes in the policy in favor of girl children. So I will do this, say, for about 10 minutes, and then I will do a 5-minute kind of presentation, if possible a PowerPoint presentation, on what MV Foundation has been working on for adolescent children and girls, especially girls, in the last 3 years, because I think we're learning a lot of lessons from that. So we would like to share, and much more, I think we would like to know what more MV Foundation could do to make our work better. You know, I mean, it's as much sharing our solutions as our problems, and if anybody can tell me what more MV Foundation can do, that will be most welcome, you know, because we don't have answers to many questions that we are facing at the moment while we are actually working on the ground. So these are the two portions. Now let me come to the first portion on what we did was we interviewed over 1,000 girls. 400 girls were girls whose parents went to school. 600 were those whose parents never went to school. And we felt that the children of parents who never went to school would have faced far more difficult problems than those whose parents went to school. And in fact, we started on this hypothesis, and it seemed so true that the problems confronted by the first generation learner are far more serious than the problems confronted by the other students. Although they come from similar socio-economic background. In fact, we did not find much difference between the economic position of students who came from first generation learner families and students who came from others. You know, but the fact that the family had a history of going to school enabled the parents to give support to their daughters to continue in education in a far more efficient manner than the fact that when parents never went to school, in fact, they had no clue on what they have to do to support the children to continue their education. In fact, they were interested, but I think they had no clue at all on what can be done. So it's a huge issue of the culture of handling school going, culture of literacy, culture of negotiating with schools, with school teachers, culture of getting documentation, the transfer certificate, the admission procedures, the medical certificate. Much of this, the first generation learner parents had no clue at all. And so they never participated in enabling their children continue going to school. Whereas on the other hand, parents of literate parents knew exactly what could be done. For example, when there is an examination, the parents of literate parents would give leisure time to girls to study. But then, when there was an examination time for illiterate parents, children of illiterate parents, they really didn't know that it was so important to give them leisure time. It's not that they just didn't care. It's just that they didn't know. And I think it is so important to in fact recognize what a culture of literacy is, what a culture of packing a school bag is. You know, it's so important to emphasize this aspect when we are talking about the girls that we had studied. These are the champions. We call them champions because they came from the first generation family and they were the first ones in their family to reach up to the 12th grade. And they succeeded. And at every step they had to face odds. At the primary school level, which is up to class 5, at the elementary school level, which is up to class 8, and at the junior secondary school level, which is in classes 9 and 10, and now at the senior secondary school level, which is in classes 11 and 12. It wasn't an easy travel. Now, so this is one thing that we found. In terms of enabling, what were the enabling factors? How did they make it if they had odds at every step? One thing we found very significant was the support of the mothers. They just didn't want to have their daughters have the same life that the they have facing. That's one thing. Then the second thing is girls' own agency and their determination to go ahead against all odds. They were just determined. They wouldn't give up. I'm saying this because many a time in the narratives that we got, girls did talk about the teasing, how boys tease them, but they would never want to share that with anyone because they thought that would actually result in them being withdrawn from school. So they bore the agony of being teased while going to school, but decided that school is so important that this can be a very trivial issue and they must kind of ignore it. The third is also her ability to combine work and education. As you go to the high school level, it is unaffordable, and you find that she works before and after school hours. Sometimes she goes to school for 4 days and does not go to school for 2 days, but she's decided that she will not slip out of school for education, but she will be actually studying, and because she's so determined that she cannot fail her parents on this. They are putting in a lot of effort and sacrifice, and that she should become a pride in the family. Well, these are the non-institutional factors. The institutional factors would be a good teacher who understands and encourages the girl not to give up her studies, and we found very, very good teachers at the senior secondary school level, very unlike the kind of stories you hear about caste discrimination and what teachers are in the primary and upper primary school level. Then the hostels, residential facilities were also of very, very important. The other is that if the distance is closer to the school, that facilitates, or if there is a transport facility and if the buses are on time, that also enables a child continuing to school. So these are the enabling factors. Now I'll just go into what are the, I do not know how much time I took already, but I'll just tell you, sorry, I'll just go into what were the challenges. I think these are very, very important, but I'll quickly run through them. We can also leave much of this in the discussion. One is, of course, which is known to all, as far as girls' education is concerned, it is patriarchy and the experiences within the family that controls the girl to play a subordinate role and to fit into a stereotype of being an obedient, sacrificing daughter, and prepare her for an obedient, becoming an obedient daughter-in-law or a wife, or even a very efficient worker. Then, of course, the other challenge is that, the shift in role, which the family is not able to access. I'm so much interested in the cultural aspect. When a girl is working, the family knows what to expect of the girl. They know that she has to work, go early in the morning, come back, and they know what to tell her. Don't speak to boys. They will tell her you come home straight. But when a girl goes to school, they don't know. They don't know what the script is. It's a new experience for them. They don't know that she would need time off domestic chores to do homework. They don't know that she might want to play games, that she wants to compete with her friends, that she wants to socialize. There are many things. These are new things in their life. And this, I think, is a very big odd. Then the other thing is, I think, when I go back to patriarchy, the issue is how they use the value of safety of the girl, because they're so scared about her safety. But I think it's much more, the scare is much more to control the girl and her mobility than real scary, real issue of safety. Because when a girl has to work and walk miles to go to the workplace, sometimes leave her home for 300 miles as a migrant laborer, then the issue of safety is not really the issue of safety. But when a girl has to go to school some 8 kilometers away through a bus, then they start the issue of safety, that she's going to be teased by boys. So somewhere I begin to think that the issue of safety is there, but it's more an issue to control the mobility of the girl, to see that, because they don't know what's happening to her. She's becoming a different person. So she's asserting herself. She's wearing different kinds of clothes. Her body language is changing. Now they need to control her far more than before. So the only way they can control her, saying that it's not safe for you to travel. So I think that's a very important thing that one will have to look at. Then, so the relationship between boys and girls is a matter of controlling girls. The third is, of course, education system related issue, which I will just say in one word, that it is inadequate. Woefully poor, inadequate, and there are far more private colleges at this level, private schools at this level when compared to the government schools. 70% of children go to private schools and high fee-paying schools, and even in government schools, in fact, there's a lot of charges and expenditures involved which they can ill afford. So these, I would think, are some, I'm not going into the details of it, but this is what it is. I will end this by saying on what impact our study had on the government. I'm not saying it was only our study, but it triggered off a series of changes that happened as far as senior secondary school education is concerned for both boys and girls. Now, one thing is, they announced that the government senior secondary schools will be free, not fee payment, but free education, and also free textbooks, which we thought that this is really an impact of what we had recommended for, that because children are working before and after school hours, it has to be free. The second thing is, we said that children are going hungry to schools, either because they have to work or because they have no time to prepare their lunches, or they can't afford their lunches. Now they have announced midday meal program for children even in the secondary school level, which for classes 11 and 12, which I think are very, very good. The third important thing that has happened is an announcement of some 50 to 60 hostels for girls studying in the senior secondary school level. Otherwise, earlier hostels were there only up to class 10. But now there are hostels for children studying in classes 11 and 12 as well. And in the discussion, I can tell you about how important it is to have residential spaces, especially for girls' education. So this would be the impact, and I will not go further on the study, but I want to quickly tell you about, I think I'll show you a very quick PowerPoint presentation on MBF. I won't take much time, promise. Yeah, can you just, I hope it's going okay. Can you hear me?
This is perfect, Shantha. I have lots of questions, and you've raised so many fascinating issues, but we'll see the MVF presentation PowerPoint first, and then we'll have our conversation. But this is perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So we called it from education to gender equality, because one thing we found that when a girl is studying, it does not automatically mean that there is going to be a gender equality. So our dilemma was this precisely, that whether we will have to work towards gender equality also as a goal, and use the opportunity of mobilizing communities for education to bring about gender equality. Next. Oh God, it's going fast. Now, so in 2012, we extended our activities to cover children in 14 to 18 years age group. We worked in 133 panchayats in about 4 districts in Andhra Pradesh. So we worked in Telangana, in Rangareddy, Nalgonda, Warangal and Mehboob Nagar. I mentioned Telangana because it compares to some of the most backward districts in the country, as in the UP, Bihar or in Rajasthan. And we also worked in Kurnool district, which is again a very backward pocket in Andhra Pradesh. So in the process, we were able to, the last 3 years, identify 3,564 marriages. We stopped 566 marriages, and of course, because of stopping the marriages, there was a reduction in instances of marriages. And this was prepared 2 months ago, but we found we could stop 96 marriages through a Childline program of Government of India, which MBF is doing. The other thing that we did was that we followed up with children who dropped out before finishing class 10 to see that they continue their class 10 examination and to repeat it. Then we also mainstreamed children, about 589 of them, through open school system. The way we did it was through a process of social mobilization and in fact tracking every girl in our project area. Our program is an area-based approach where we select an area and we track every child from 0 to 18 years in terms of all their rights and utilize the Gram Panchayats, train them to track these children. The major thing, our input is on how we develop child rights protection forums and girl child protection forums in every village. So while there are existing forums like Gram Panchayats and the school management committees, we also start new local community-based organizations to provide a link between a household and the Gram Panchayat. I think this is the most empowering aspect, that we form groups of girls. They became the adolescent girls committees. In fact, there were such adolescent girls committees in many other programs of NGOs. But I think what is important is that here they are also empowered to exercise agency to break traditional barriers of caste and gender discrimination. And that I think is very, very important in the sense that they just don't discuss, but they also act. One important thing is they had all visited the local police station, requested the policeman to stop child marriages, and asked for procedures on how to book a case when there is a case of child marriage. Over a time, there was a change in the attitudes of parents. Instead of asking questions, how do I arrange for marriage of my daughter, they now ask questions, how can I organize higher education for my daughter? I think that's a very, very important thing. And registration of every birth and marriage has become mandatory in the project area. We also work with priests, pastors, qazis in the area, and we invited political leaders to be chief guests who were earlier as chief guests to child marriage functions. We told them it is against law, so they cannot attend these marriages, and told them to actually stand by children and their liberation from marriage. So this is the thing that we did. And in school, of course, we had to track every child. We created a database of children who were appearing for class 10 examination. For the class 12 examination, we made sure that they got their hall tickets. There were many, many problems that they faced, but then we had to work through the education department to sort out these problems. Then those who failed in the examination, we used WhatsApp, we used telephones to contact them, tell them not to be disheartened and tell them that they have another chance and they must retake the exam. Then we also campaigned for higher education. We arranged for public transport to ensure that children in fact go to schools and colleges. So these are some of the things. I mean, I will answer the rest in the questions, but we also made use of the open school system as a route to formal education. Almost at every stage we worked with the government officials, the police, revenue, labor, education, health and Panchayati Raj for rescue, release and rehabilitation of girls, against child marriages and against child labor. That's it.
Shantha, thank you. That's a wonderfully rich set of comments that you've given us to think about and to talk about. So I thought I would just start really from your very first point, which is that addressing this question of educational empowerment for excluded or marginalized groups, including girls in rural India, let's say that that's what we're talking about, is a complex issue. There is not one simple solution. And in a way, it's a banal observation. But in a way, it's a very profound observation, because I think that very often in the long history of trying to address educational disadvantage, there's been a sort of assumption that there are really quick fixes, that you give a stipend to the parents and, that's the solution. You have toilets for girls, that's the solution. You have hostels for girls, that's the solution. You have whatever it may be. And I think your first point is that actually this is complex and it's multifactorial. So I think that's a very important observation, because it means that it's going to take action and thinking and creativity on a range of different fronts, which you outlined, to make a difference. We can't just give up if one remedy doesn't work. And so I think you pointed to some of these complex factors, and I wanted to ask you a little bit more about a couple of them. So I think the first very interesting observation you made was that you decided, and of course we did the same in our project, which you referenced, the work on tertiary education with our colleagues in Pune and in Rajasthan. You decided to work on success rather than failure. I think a lot of work in this area, looking at kind of caste differences and gender differences and rural to urban differences, a lot of work is focused, understandably, on the obstacles. But I think it's very interesting and stimulating that you decided to look at success and ask the question, well, what can we learn from the success of these champions? And so, as you say, it's a complex issue. And you looked at, I think you made two general categories of factors that you considered in your study, which I think you conducted in Telangana. One was you looked at kind of personal, individual, interpersonal factors. So you mentioned the girl's determination. You mentioned the kind of agency of the girl and the capability of the girl to combine work and study. So individual factors, which you might put under the label of resilience, that these girls may not be geniuses necessarily, some are, some aren't, but they are very focused, very determined, and very capable. And then you mentioned the other interpersonal or individual fact, if you like, that you mentioned was parents. And this is what I wanted to really ask you to say a little bit more about. So you talked about this culture of literacy. Very interesting. And you said one of the big differences between girls who are coming from families where there's some culture of literacy, maybe not up till 10th and 12th, but at least some awareness of school, those girls have a much easier time than girls who come from families where there's absolutely no culture of literacy. And I think you gave some examples. You said, it's not that the parents don't want to support the girls, and we're talking about girls, but I'm sure similar arguments apply to boys, but for our purposes, we're talking about girls. So you said it's not that the parents don't want to support the boys, but they really don't have any baseline. They don't have any experience. They don't realize that when you go to school, there are certain things that are expected. There are certain things that your peers are going to be doing. So how does one generate or generalize a culture of literacy? After all, we don't want to give up on the very large number of girls whose parents never went to school. We don't want to say, well, it's too hard, because, these parents, however well-meaning, really have no clue. So what ideas should we have about bridging this gap where there isn't already a pre-existing culture of literacy in the family? And I know you've thought about this a lot, but I just wondered if we could just talk about this and you could share some of your ideas, because I think this is a very, very big issue for many of the most deprived and disadvantaged children, where they are trying, and of course many people are trying, the government is trying to reverse this kind of exclusion. But where there is not a pre-existing culture of literacy, what then can we do to make sure we don't just write off a whole generation?
I think this is what we have been grappling with for a very long time. And I have been arguing that the education system must be sensitized to the needs of the first generation learner. It's not, normally they tend to blame the poor parents that they're not supporting them in school, in getting the child to school. But they don't seem to realize that the parents don't know, as you say, how to do it. So they have to take on the role of what a parent should do, rather than tell the parent you're not helping your child in a homework, but create a situation where they don't have to do homework. You know, that they do all whatever they have to do in the 6 hours they are in school. Because when they go home, the parents just don't know what to do. Or they will have to call the parents, trust them, talk to them, and tell them, look, they need a lot more support from you. I mean, but there never seems to be a dialogue between the school system and the parent. They're always in some kind of an adversarial relationship. I'm not saying a sweeping, I mean, it is a sweeping statement. There are exceptions, of course. But on the whole, the parents are scared. They don't feel comfortable and confident to go to a school. They don't know how to talk to a school teacher. So the school has to sort of extend itself to the parent. First of all, tell the parent, sit down when the parent comes to the school, because when a poor parent comes to the school, he or she is made to stand all the time for an hour, you know, when they're talking to her, talking at her. Instead, make her also sit on a chair the way they would make me sit on a chair. Do some little things that where the parents gain confidence. And I think it's important that there is a dialogue between the school teacher and the parent community, and sensitizing the school teacher about their role, especially the school teacher in a public school. They are meant for these parents.
That's a really very good point, Shantha, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I think it's actually not just in this community that you've worked with. I think in many places, and we have in our center at Harvard, we've done some work with other disadvantaged groups, including, for example, the Roma community in Europe, and we found exactly the same thing, that there was, instead of being a supportive or an enabling environment, there was an adversarial environment between very poor, uneducated parents who wanted the best for their children but really didn't know, and the school, which kind of dismisses them as being ignorant or as being uncaring. So I think this is an extremely important point, that the onus is on the educational authority and on those who have the access to include these families and make them feel that the school is their place. So I think that's a really important point. In fact, one of the very interesting programs that our Roma colleagues had developed with a lot of success in these communities where nobody had really trusted the schools and nobody had sent their children to school because the children felt so badly treated and made fun of, is in one of the kind of innovations, they actually got some of the grandmothers to come into the school, even if the grandmothers couldn't read or write. They had so much authority and they would help the teachers organize the children, and that made these children feel, oh, that, you know, people are respecting my community too. So I think, as you say, whether it's just inviting parents to sit on a chair and to, you know, to respect them like any other adult, or whether you're actually giving them some sort of informal role, it's a way of bridging this gap. So I think that's, I'm so glad you said that. I think it's a very important thing.
Sorry, I want to comment here. In fact, some of these were covered in the Right to Education Act. when education was made a fundamental right. And I think it got lost on the teachers, on the importance of these provisions. One provision was that they should not insist on a birth certificate when a child gets admitted into school. You know, because it's so difficult for a poor parent to get a birth certificate. And because of that, many children were not given admission. So he says you first give an admission and then give them time to get the birth certificate, but don't make that a condition to be admitted into school. Then the second thing is that when an older child gets admitted into school, that child can get admitted anytime during the academic session, which is again a very child-friendly thing. Say, for example, there's an out-of-school child who's withdrawn from child labor and wants to come to school in the month of October, and the session has already begun in July. Earlier, the system would say the admissions are closed, come the next academic year. But the Right to Education Act says that you cannot deny a child a right to education. Whenever the child is ready, even if it's the last day of the academic session, you will have to admit the child into school, which I think is a very child-friendly act.
So Shantha, can I just ask you on that point, you know, and you and I were together last week at some meetings about the problem of child trafficking. So are you saying that what the Right to Education Act requires is that even if a child is, say, being sent away and has been exploited and is returned in the middle of the academic year, they have to be admitted even if school has already, you know, half the syllabus has been covered?
Absolutely. And the child, according to law, has to be admitted into the age-appropriate class. Say the child has dropped out in class 2 and she was 7-year-old then, and she's come back as an 11-year-old, she will not be admitted in class 2. She will be admitted in class 6. And it is her right that the school prepares her through bridge course to class 6. You know, they give her a special training. So which again is a revolutionary, very radical thing, because to get an 11-year-old child to sit along with a 7-year-old in class 2 is not an encouraging thing, and the girl might just not want to go to school. So they would make her sit with her peers, do special training, and it has been found through the experience of government and NGOs that children are capable, older children are capable of accelerated learning, and they can learn very fast.
So they can catch up. But Shantha, this is obviously puts quite a burden on some schools. I mean, you know, we were talking last week when we were together about, you know, this problem of a lot of children, say, from parts of Bihar being trafficked, say, to Rajasthan. That was the place we were talking about. So there would be some districts in Bihar where there might be a lot of children who are returned into the school system. So does the central government provide funds, or is that a state government responsibility, or are there special allocation to cover this? Because then you really need to have, as you were saying, you need to bring the child up to speed within the school system. So as you say, you don't want them to be humiliated by sitting with children who are much younger. On the other hand, they've missed so much training and education. So how is a local school meant to fund this, and how are they meant to, you know, have the resources to do this?
In many places, they have started the residential bridge courses through the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, and where the children are put into the bridge course and then mainstreamed into the school. But they're first registered as a student in the school and then sent to a bridge course. But I'm afraid that it's not working as well as it should. And as you say, there is a problem of intention, there's a problem of fund crunch, and a problem of resources, because a teacher will have to teach regular students and cannot be asked to teach even the students who come anytime. So there has to be some special planning for them, which has not happened. But at least there is a provision now, and one can constantly make a demand for this. The reason why we are discussing this is to talk about the first generation learner, and to say how by law there have been provisions made to make it easy for the first generation learner, but then this has not been internalized by the education department, whereas the lawmakers have understood it. The education bureaucracy, the education system, they are still not geared and ready to respond to the needs of the first generation learner. They still think it's okay for children not to be in school.
So this is obviously a work in progress. Okay, I just want to move on a little bit because there's so many other issues I want to raise a couple before we open up. So you also mentioned, I thought it was very interesting, that you know, the importance of the girls' agency, and you said that even if they are, you know, bothered by sexual harassment, or you would call it eve teasing, they don't share this information with their families because they are, you know, worried that if they do, they will be kept back and not allowed to go to school. And certainly we found that in research we've done too, that very often girls say that actually they don't have anyone they can confide this information in. So it's one thing if somebody's just bothering you a little bit, but I mean, there are, as we know, there are also cases where girls are seriously harassed and seriously, you know, bothered and even worse. And they don't feel that there is a forum or an agency or a space in the school or somewhere where they can really get the support they need. So I wondered if you could say a little bit about that and also relate that maybe to this whole question of adolescent education and sex education and issues about gender and safety that are such an important part of the school curriculum, but where there's quite a lot of reticence to actually address them. You know, obviously now in India, for the last, you know, December 2012, we've all been very conscious of the reality of sexual violence in the public sphere. But my sense is that in the school system still there is this kind of this reluctance, this kind of hesitation, sometimes a hostility to really addressing the urgency of this issue. So, you know, it's fine that the girls are so resilient, but of course not all girls are resilient, and sometimes this trauma is very, very damaging, and it's not good to require of a young girl that she should be a heroine in order to go to school. So I would love to hear some of your reflections on this topic.
I agree entirely with you. I mean, why must she go through this and suffer and, you know, and then we make her a heroine? In fact, it is precisely because of this, I think there is a need for several environment building activities at a very local level, which we have attempted in the MB Foundation, you know. In fact, there has to be support groups among adults with whom girls can, in fact, interact and repose confidence in and share information when there is a girl getting married. So it's not just a girl's bravery and courage, but bravery and courage embedded in a societal concern where we get at least a group of committed people in every community who will say that if you have the courage to fight, we have the courage to stand by you. It's so important that there are community like the Child Rights Protection Forums who will sort of give courage to girls, you know, to stand their ground. Because ultimately the girl has to do her, if she didn't fight, having a support group is not enough. She has to also, finally, if she has to, she's a last straw on the camel's back. She has to decide that, no, I can't take this anymore. Once she takes, but for that you need community support. But then when you have community support, you need both. And I think one will have to work on community support and girls' agency simultaneously and not say girls fight and fight your battle against child marriage without creating community support, without creating shelter homes, without creating some temporary places where these children can stay. All that is very, very important. The second thing is there has to be shared spaces for girls and boys to come together. At an adolescent age when girls and boys are trying to sort of explore and in so many ways, so as you say in sexuality, you know, they must know that there can be many kinds of relationships girls and boys have. They can be part of youth clubs, they can be part of games, they can sports, public debate forums, but then in India, especially in the villages, girls and boys just don't meet. So when they meet, even for a fraction of a second, they get excited. So they must know how to deal with the kind of excitement and the boundaries of such excitement, and discover themselves in the process, which they are just not given an opportunity to do. I think it's so important to have youth clubs for both boys and girls together, and that is what we are trying at the moment in India, to get girls and boys together in a youth club and not have a separate club for girls and a separate club for boys. So what I'm trying to say is a community environment is so important to enable a girl exercise agency. You can't target the girl and say, now fight. You have to target the whole society to get the girl to exercise agency, and that is very important.
So I just want to ask you one more question on this. You know, the other very interesting thing you said in your opening comments was that when families restrict girls' freedom, you were sort of saying that it's claimed to be for their safety. It's claimed to be for protection. So, you know, many, I mean, it's very common for parents to say, you know, you have to come straight home and not to give permission for girls to go out, and to be very punitive if girls are, you know, chatting with someone, with a boy, or if a girl wants to go to a movie on a Saturday night or something. And we got a lot of this information too when we did our surveys with families, very loving and adoring and supportive families, but very restrictive of their daughters. And so the argument was always, but you know, it's so dangerous outside, and we've heard of this story that this girl had this bad experience. We've heard of this story of this girl running away with a boy whose parents didn't know. And your point was actually, this is really not about safety. It's really about curbing freedom. And it's about restriction, and it's about some sort of control, patriarchal control, I think you said, of a girl or a woman's body. And then you made the interesting point that, you know, these sort of concerns don't seem to apply when someone is sending a girl or a woman to work. And so often one sees, you know, young women on the building site all on their own working. That doesn't seem to be an issue then. So I wondered if you could say a little bit more about that, because it seems to me that that's a really big obstacle that many young women face, you know, that they feel very oppressed by the family situation, but they also feel very beholden, of course, and respectful of their families, and they feel very grateful for the support. We came across this again and again where girls actually, we felt, were actually going in for a depression because they were pulled out of school after maybe 6th standard, 6th, 7th standard, and they were just at home, and it was boring, and it was lonely, and it was isolating. And the only thing that was going to happen in their life was a marriage to somebody that they may or may not have liked. So it's a very depressing prospect. But the parents themselves, I think, feel trapped because there's so much pressure from the community. It's not as if the mother or the father doesn't love the daughter. It's not as if they don't want the best for her, but they also feel that this is what is considered responsible behavior. So again, I think this is a very complex issue, and I'd love your thoughts on how you address this issue of safety and of control of women in a society where there is a lot of harassment, and where there is a lot of violence, and where there is a lot of you know, discrimination. How should we think about this, and what are the institutional mechanisms, what are the advocacy points you think that we can take up to actually help families really support their girls in going out into the world with confidence, rather than sequestering them at home as if they're some sort of endangered property?
In fact, we were in the beginning very much convinced that it was the issue of safety of girls that was actually keeping her away from education and from traveling long distances for school, and we address the issue as safety of girls and how do we make it safe for girls to go around. But over a period of some 3 to 4 years of working with girls and looking at what was happening, we found that while this is true, it was more so to control the girls. And that, as I said, is because they really don't know what to anticipate when a girl has finished, say, 10th class, what to anticipate when she finishes 11, what to anticipate when she finishes 12. So these are new freedoms that the girl is experiencing in her life, but then the family doesn't understand these new freedoms, and they feel that this girl is going out of hand and she has to be controlled. So, you know, in a way, I think this education itself is empowering, is changing the girl's personality, and they are not able to relate to this changed girl in their family, and they feel much greater compulsion to control her because she is going through this education route. So that is why I think the thing of eve teasing and all that becomes important. I know that because of course there is eve teasing, and I'm sure I agree with you that she should not accept it lying low. The way you help is to talk to boys. Talk to them, tell them what the consequences of the eve teasing is about. Then talk to boys about saying that, look, you can give respect to each other as equal. In fact, sensitizing girls and boys through youth clubs, and there are many other initiatives that you have to take to make it a normal thing for girls and boys to be together. But here, I think we have not made any such attempts to combat eve teasing and stigmatize the girl. I mean, and the girl, of course, feels oppressed that she's being teased. But I think there has to be a lot of work to be done on boys, on masculinity, on why they must not tease girls, and why it is so important that for their own development and liberation that they work along with girls and enjoy being together and doing something more creative than harassing them. I agree entirely with you on what you described about the anxieties of parents and therefore their anxieties about the safety of girls. It is in existence, but I think we have to go deeper into trying to understand where this anxiety comes from in the context of girls' education.
So Shantha, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to open it up to our audience, or our participants. So my last question is about the MD Foundation, which, as you know, is an organization which I and many, many others kind of look to as a model and admire very much. And you mentioned several things in your PowerPoint, you know, this idea that you take an area or a block or a particular group of villages and you go to every single child. I think that's a kind of a very interesting and important method, because of course it's always the most vulnerable who fall through the cracks otherwise, and so you don't really take no for an answer, and I think that's really important and interesting. So the most vulnerable, whether it's a disabled child or it's a child of a single parent, a divorced mother, or, you know, very low caste or whatever it may be, that's of course very important. But I wanted to ask you about the way in which your work has triggered change and the mobilization that you've done to kind of promote this. So you mentioned several things. You mentioned both the changes that have come from your champions work. So you talked about free textbooks and about midday meals. So those, I think, are, in a way you could say those are kind of anti-poverty measures. Maybe they're addressing the lack of economic power or economic resources amongst the family. But then you also talked about hostels and residential spaces. Now, how does that really help? Because if a family is reluctant to let a girl kind of go to school or go to college, wouldn't they be even more reluctant to let them live away from home and so on? So how, in your experience, how does this work? And is this a model that could be taken up much more widely? Is this something that you would suggest should become like a model nationally, or a model in areas where we know there's a high proportion of girls who are dropping out or being pulled out of school? You know, what is the role of these hostels and of residential accommodation in a society which really values family life and the family's protection and so much?
I will start from where you ended. That is that when children are in hostels and residential spaces, it actually strengthens family ties and bonds. It doesn't alienate them, but it makes a father, a mother, and a child, and a child. And when she comes home, she's treated as a dear child who's come home, and they give her the most favorite food that she would like to eat because she's missed out on the favorite food. Otherwise, they would have never known what her favorite food was. So it is a misconception that because she's away from home, she's away from their hearts. In fact, they're bonded far more because they're away from home. So I think that has been founded in our work throughout, how hostels have strengthened family ties. So it's not true what you say. The other thing is, I think it's important for girls to be away from a routine that sucks them into a role that they have to play. You know, if they are in the house, then they'll have to do domestic work. I mean, much as we would want gender equality within the family, it's a tough thing to crack. So they will have to be the last ones to eat in the family. So she can't be fighting a gender battle at home and then going to school. So, but if she's in a hostel, she doesn't have to fight these battles. You know, she doesn't have to say that I won't be the last one to eat. I want equal share with my brother. There are many things that happen. I mean, these things are important, but then these battles are somewhere tucked aside because she is now in a hostel with her peers. The third thing is when she is with her peers, they are all from similar circumstances. And the kind of solidarity that emerges in that is the kind of energy that comes out of it is unimaginable. You know, they're all charged by the same sense of injustice or need for justice. They're charged by the same sense of freedom. They're charged by the same sense of doing good. And they give support to one another to say that let's not give up. Let's go ahead. Let's study. You know, that kind of a pure solidarity that comes by staying in a hostel, even if it's a bad condition hostel, what they give each other as strength is something that cannot be paralleled when they are, you know, you cannot replicate that in a family situation. But the question is, can you provide hostels for all? How many hostels can you provide? You know, that is a very practical, pragmatic question. I mean, where are the resources? Do you say every girl must go to a hostel? We found that for every girl who's gone to the hostel, there are 10 girls who've gone to a local school. So it's not just that she is getting liberated. In her liberation, she's paving the way for liberation of many, many other girls in the neighborhood. So it is not just a one-to-one thing, but the spin-off, I think, is very, very important. For one generation, at least, if you are able to protect these girls through hostels, it becomes a matter of culture and habit for the rest, the future generations, to go to the local school automatically. This is a transition program rather than a permanent solution.
Okay, Shantha, thank you so much. I think we could, of course, talk for many hours together, but I think it's now the turn of our audience. So let's open it to questions, please.
You have listed the critical variables of success, such as have parents gone to school, encouragement from parents, travel, etc. Apparently, these have succeeded for you. Now, how do you scale this into the larger government school systems? Is it just giving them results, advice sufficient?
Can you repeat the last part of the sentence? It wasn't clear.
How do you scale this into the larger government school systems? Is giving them advice sufficient?
Giving them advice sufficient? No, this isn't an advice. This is a concrete suggestions of improving travel, giving free bus passes, making it easy for a child to have access to schools. I think these are very, very concrete and doable suggestions, and they have been carried out.
So I think the point is it's not just advice, it's actually to enable, and I think Shantha also made the point that parents without this culture of literacy should be consciously and positively welcomed into the school environment. So it's not that the school is setting itself up as the authority and the parents are considered as outsiders, but rather the school welcomes the community and sees the school space as something for all parents and all families. And I think that shift then gives parents confidence, and I've seen that myself, you know, when parents who may have never been in the school themselves are maybe intimidated by a teacher, and often there are, you know, caste differences and other differences, when they feel welcomed and they feel respected, it really can change the dynamic and it can have a very positive impact. I think it's what Shantha was saying. So maybe I can now ask one of the questions that we received online. Shantha, the question was, how can we make bridge course for educating and mainstreaming of out-of-school adolescent girls an integral part of the school system?
One thing is there has to be an larger education policy that will enable lateral entry of those who have been left out into the mainstream school. It could be at any level. Say if you've been left out at high school, how do you do a lateral entry into an age-appropriate class? Left out at primary, how do you do lateral entry? I think the important is to imagine a policy of lateral entry of students, because this is the only way you can tackle the backlog. The second thing is that if you didn't do it, then look at the consequences for the rights of these children. So you will have to make it practical. There's no question of being impractical about it, because if these children lose out on education, they lose out on many of their human rights. And considering that it would cause too many violations of their rights, I think we will have to, in fact, invest in getting them into the mainstream. If there is a will, solutions will automatically flow. One must know that the consequences of not acting on this issue is going to cost these children dear. Of course, it is going to cost the system also dear, a cost of inaction on these children. But I am not worried about what is going to happen to the system. I am worried about what is going to happen to these children if they were not mainstream. So I think it's so important that we look at them. You can't have disempowered, illiterate children without self-esteem, who are hungry and who don't know what will happen to them the next day, who are working, who are so vulnerable, and it's not fair for them. One will have to look at it as an issue of justice.
Should we get the second question?
My question was, I wanted to know more about how are you building community support, and can you please share some practical and sustainable techniques that you have used? Maybe even one or two examples, considering the time limitation, would be great.
Can I repeat the question, because it was not completely clear? So you're asking Shantha to please give practical examples of how you build community support. Was that clear?
Right.
And then pardon?
That's right. That's right.
Yes. And then you had a final part to your question, which I couldn't hear very well.
That was
not clear. It was practical and sustainable, because that's one of the key words I was wanting her to focus on.
Yeah. Yes. So Shantha, examples of practical but also sustainable mechanisms, examples for really building this community support that, you know, you said was so essential to enabling this kind of success in schools. So how does one build that sort of long-term community support?
I think as you say, given the time, it's too short. But let me just give you an example. In the sense that when you do a survey of children, say, in a particular area and involve the entire community in trying to find out which child is in school and which child is not in school, and find that 2 or 3 children have left the village and have gone to some distant place in Pune into a red light area, right? Now, because there have been street plays, there have been public meetings, there have been door-to-door campaigns, parents have been told, upper castes have been told, lower castes have been told. They think that it is now their business to get those 3 girls back from Pune to some place near Hyderabad. So now they put it before the Gram Panchayat, and they tell the Gram Panchayat, look, there are these 3 girls and we're all very worried about these 3 girls, and the Gram Panchayat is also worried. So they contact the local police and the labor department, and they won't act because it's not the first time that they would actually act. Then they would send their own people to the red light area to find out where these girls are. And they locate the girls. Then they come back and tell the police and labor department, look, we know where these girls are. We did your job. Now, can you now go and rescue? Because we are not enforcement officers. You are the ones who can enforce law. So they will now there would be pressure on them where they would go to Pune and then meet with the government officials in Pune and rescue these 3 girls. When the 3 girls come back, they find that 2 girls have HIV and AIDS. The girl, one girl is okay, I mean, in the sense that she can be reintegrated into the school system. Now, because the entire community is now worked so hard for these 3 girls, they don't stigmatize these 2 girls with HIV and AIDS. They don't stigmatize her saying that she's gone to a red light area, but they think of these 2 girls as their dear ones and that they must get some ART treatment. And again, they get a link into the health system, struggle hard to see that the girls actually survive. This is a very concrete case of a particular case that, since you asked for a concrete example, I'm telling you how when the community begins to care and take pride in children, even children from difficult circumstances who have been through sexual abuse, who would otherwise been ostracized and sent away from the village, would be embraced and would feel comfortable, and they come to integrate. In these 2 girls, I must tell you, within 6 months, 1 girl passed away, 1 girl has survived, and she continues to have her ART treatment, but at no time have they stigmatized these girls. I could immediately think of this example, so I'm giving you this. I hope this gives you an idea of what social mobilization can do.
So thank you. I think maybe we have time for one or two more questions. We have another question which somebody submitted, Shantha, which is, we are interested in tribal girls' education and empowerment. So obviously there are particular difficulties, particular challenges for tribal communities. And I know from looking at the statistics that we have, that tribal communities, scheduled tribes, are among the lowest enrollments.
Absolutely.
In school, lowest enrollments, right from primary school right up to when you get to college, it's not even, I think, 4%, very low. So there are particular challenges. So again, from your experience, and I know that in Telangana you've worked with tribal communities, what are the concrete points that you think are, for example, triggers for positive change?
I think the most important factor is really having the working residential spaces and schools for tribal girls, because the geographies are so distant. It is so difficult to fit in a modern institution like a school into a pre-modern society, which is a tribal community, where the communities have only 4 or 5 hamlets, and then you have to walk across 2 hills for another 4 or 5 hamlets. So you can't have a high school, because a viable high school should have at least 300 children with 6 teachers. But the communities are not. So there is a mismatch between the way they are located and the way the schools are to be delivering services, and we have never been able to match the two. And the only way to do it, I would think, is through residential spaces and residential accommodation, but making it far more child-friendly. Having said this, Jackie, I would like to just point out that the girls in the country are doing far, far better than the boys in terms of education. The dropout rates among the girls has reduced, whereas among the boys it is increasing. In fact, I have this figure which says that from classes 1 to 5, there is 19.8, classes 1 to 8, 36.3 drop out of school, but among girls only 32.9 when compared to 39.2 among boys. This is 2013 figure. In classes 1 to 10, total is 47.4 dropout of school, but boys are 48.1 and girls are 46.7. So when we look at the positive triggers, it is so important to even look at why is it that the girls are doing better. In fact, in Telangana, the girls are on par with boys as far as the dropout, education is concerned. There are as many boys in the 12th grade as there are girls. Why is it and how is it that the girls are catching up with boys? And I think this is very, very important to study. When we talk about positive triggers, we looked at the micro issues, but I think we will have to look at also the overall mood, which in fact has encouraged girls to go to school. Of course there is gender inequality. Of course there is gender oppression. I mean, of course there is discrimination. I'm not denying all this, because that is why I say that education does not automatically resolve these issues. But then these unresolved issues remain, whereas education, they are coming on par with boys. And that, I think, is a question that one will have to ask. I'm afraid we don't have that time to discuss that, but I think it's a very important issue that we have to discuss. Why is it that girls are able to do as well as with boys, but why is it that the gender issue has not been resolved? I think that is an issue that we will have to start asking.
Thank you. Okay, we have one last question which has just been submitted, but before we take that, and that will be our final question, I just wanted to mention that one of the people who wrote in asked us, how can schools with resources and access contribute or participate in this initiative on a global level? And I think what we will do, we will undertake to do after this webinar is we will make some links available so that people who are interested in participating, who are interested in learning more, perhaps in participating in some online discussions and even sharing tools. And I know there are a lot of tools, online tools that, for example, provide syllabi for teachers, have good ideas. We can undertake to make some of these resources available. So I just wanted to say that for the person who asked this question about participating, that we very much want to encourage like a network and a constituency of interested parties across the country who really care about these issues like we do, to join us and to work together. So we will be certainly, please keep an eye out on the website of the South Asia Institute. We'll make this available to those of you who have written in. So now, should we just have our final question? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I don't know if you can hear me. I've actually asked lots of questions and would love at some point to have the chance to have them all answered. But I think the biggest question I have is, how much can we assume that the fantastic lessons that you've learnt, Shantha, can be generalized across other areas of India? And how should we be thinking about the similarities or differences in different areas and regions so that we can, start to understand how to get every girl educated?
Thank you. Shantha, did you hear that question?
No, I think it requires it's too huge, but let me tell you that I do agree there are specificities. I do agree that all are not the same and that you will have to strategize differently. But then there are certain things that are common, and we look at those things that are common that cut across regions, occupations, these are, one thing is that getting a child to school is a process of resolving conflicts, and we must learn how to resolve the conflict without polarizing the society into girl versus boy, without polarizing the society in caste basis, and how do you build consensus. So I mean, I only can say that you can build a norm only in the process of resolving conflicts. You must itch for a conflict, you must resolve the conflict and create a norm, and that is doable. And I think in any place you go, if you have to get a girl or a boy to school, you have to resolve the conflict, and you have to work out ways of resolving the conflict. And therefore, there is an element of power struggle, but it can be overcome by ethics and by greater human values, which all of us would believe in.
Very much. Thank you for that great question and for the answer. Do we have time for one more? Okay, let's take a very last question.
Because there's no time, I'm not being specific.
In your experience, what have been your insights when looking at the most excluded group, the Dalit girls? Are there some special enablers which in your experience has really worked to support them? Not just keeping them in schools, but also empowering them to participate with confidence and dignity in the schooling experience?
I think it is tough to get a girl to school, and tougher still if the girl is a Dalit girl. I mean, there is no doubt on it, and there is a double kind of an operation that a girl faces. What we have done is to create support structures across communities to support these girls come to school, I mean, which is a very different kind of a model, in the sense that we get the issue of girl child discussed by all in the community. The rich, the poor, the upper caste, the lower caste. Somewhere a girl becomes a talking point everywhere. You know, that is it right for the girl to suffer in this manner? And that, I think, creates an atmosphere where you ease the tensions and where you get support for this girl who is, as I said, doubly oppressed, and to get this girl to go to school. So what we are trying to do very hard is this. This is the conflict, that she's a Dalit and that she's a girl. And how do you resolve this conflict? And that we don't do by reinforcing the conflict and strengthening the Dalit identity and the gender identity, but to ease it by saying that let all of us come together to support her going to school. So how do you convert a parochial issue into a universal issue? You know, because I think the politics, which is very easy to do, is to reinforce parochial identities and harden those stands and strengthen them as being a very radical politics, that you have Dalit identity, Dalit politics, you have gender identity, gender politics, and radicalize. But here we are talking about recognizing that there is a Dalit discrimination, recognizing that there is a gender discrimination, but the way to resolve gender discrimination and Dalit discrimination is to create a norm that even these girls, even these children will have to go to school, and the entire village must work hard to get these children to go to school. So it's not in reinforcing divisions, but in sort of easing tensions that you enable these children actually study with dignity.
So I think that it's a wonderful point, Shantha, and I think what you're saying in one way is really, it's a question of leadership of individuals who have the courage to break down and to challenge these kind of categories and say, you know, there's nothing different, to really to see the essential humanity or the commonality. And so I suppose one way one could, you know, gloss the answer to the question from what you're saying is, you know, that there's not one strategy, but everyone in the chain, whether it's a school teacher or whether it's the bus driver or whether it's somebody, you know, making a midday meal or whether it's the parent of another child, all of these are agents who contribute to an environment. And so in a way every one of us has that responsibility, because I think that that's really your point, that it's not a question of sectional organizing. You know, let's get Dalits or Dalit women to kind of make take leadership of this issue alone, though that may be part of it. You're saying this is actually a responsibility across the society in all the fora in which these children are located, if I understood you rightly.
Yeah, you said it so much better than what I did, and that's what it is, surely.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Shantha. Thank you for your wonderful comments and your wisdom and sharing that with us. It's really been a privilege. I've learned so much. And thank you also to our audience for joining in. And if anybody, as I said, has a further interest, we will make some resources available, and we look forward to building on this conversation. And there will be other webinars which we hope you will join in the future. Thank you so much, and goodbye to all.
Thank you, Jackie. Bye-bye.
Bye.